This week's episode is kindly sponsored by World ANVIL. Stick around at the end for more information. Hey everybody, I'm Daniel from Spacedock, and I want to talk about planetary invasions, more specifically why they would never happen in any realistic setting. Now, the concept of invading a planet from space, by literally landing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops and tanks and vehicles onto this planet, and then campaigning those people all around the planet, fighting an entire resisting population until they're completely subjugated and you've won, is pretty much literally infeasible, in that it would take so long and be so difficult that it could be reasonably described as going on forever. This is well articulated in the second Expanse book, Caliban's War, when Martian characters talk about how impossible it would be to ever invade Earth, despite it being what all of the propaganda sells the Martian population on. Because a planet is not something that you can drive the enemy out of and then plant a flag. It's not a town or a castle or a city. It's something with an astronomically massive surface area and endless terrain, and basically infinite places where angry resistors could hide in the hills for decades upon decades, and it would just never end. Instead, the shape of planetary conquest in a realistic future setting would be heavily reliant on the most ancient and effective tool of warfare, making the enemy surrender. And it would be quite easy in this context, because if you take over the gravity well of a planet, and you have ships with weapons on them capable of bombing cities from orbit and destroying them, and there are no other enemy ships or fleets that can come to help, just the people on the planet below, the planet will surrender. If it doesn't surrender, the fleet can threaten to bomb the planet. If it still doesn't surrender, the fleet can bomb the planet a bit, and then they will surrender. If they're insane, if it's an entire planet of self-destructive sociopaths, the fleet will presumably continue to bomb the planet until there's nothing on it, and then just land and build things. But this wouldn't happen, because everyone has a basic self-preservation instinct, and no matter how many men with rifles you have, you can't fight off a fleet of warships that's 50,000 miles above you. Nobody's building ships on the planet and launching them in such numbers as to defeat the fleet in space. It's completely impractical. So sieges, bombardment, and more often the threat of bombardment would be the order of the day and the shape of planetary conquest. For this purpose, the only real assault force you would ever need is take-and-hold troops. Garrison Forces, because the problem of leaving men somewhere in order to make something that you made yours still yours is an ancient one. That problem is never going away. But the job of those troops would be to land and to garrison the planet that you have now taken, not to manually force its population off the planet or seek and destroy all of them over the course of years upon years upon years. This is why in a lot of more realistic science fiction settings, you'll see that armies are basically gone and replaced by Marine Corps, with the only real ground troops in warfare being an extension of the ships that they are attached to, whether it's to seize other ships and installations in boarding actions, or to keep an eye on a planet or planetoid or astral body that you have just forced to surrender until your government comes along with garrison troops to hold it down. I want to talk more about surrendering and routes in space battles in a future video, because it's a strangely absent concept in a lot of science fiction. Most sci-fi, particularly in visual mediums, is full of soldiers and ship crews that seem incredibly willing to die in battle and never run away or surrender, no matter what the situation is. Not only is this not very realistic, but it also takes away the central concept of how wars have been fought forever, which is not to maximize casualties and death and violence, but to minimize it by provoking surrender. There'll be more on that in a future video, but for the moment, the main topic I wanted to address was that while I acknowledge that things like Star Wars and Halo need exciting ground battles to make their setting interesting, in a more realistic setting they probably wouldn't exist, because it doesn't matter if you're 10 guys with rifles or 500 guys with rifles on a tiny island. If there's a giant battleship parked next to the island, none of the potential outcomes involve an invasion of the island. It's just a situation where one side has literally no capacity to win. And when you can't win, if you have any sense, you don't fight. Big thanks to World ANVIL for sponsoring this week's episode, and I think this is something that Spacedock fans will be particularly interested in. World ANVIL is a very unique and interesting platform for world building. It's essentially a tool set for writers, novelists, and role-playing game GMs that allows you to create pages to organize your notes or to create articles for the lore of your own universe. It even has systems for putting together interactive maps for fantasy settings, and it'll be a serious help to anyone who has all of those little details and tidbits about their world constantly bouncing around their head and needs to have them all delineated into a big organized place that's less oppressive than a spreadsheet or a big complicated file structure, and instead is a nice kind of decorated, organized template in the style of your world or your genre. It'll help you show off the basic ideas of your world and some details about it, which can support you if you have a novel you're trying to sell, or it can just stand on its own as a showcase of a world that you've created. It even has systems for monetizing your world building and creations, which is a big help to up-and-coming creatives. Sci-fi and fantasy are in desperate need of new blood and new ideas. We live in an age of endless recycling and rebooting, and I'm very happy to support a platform that encourages up-and-coming writers and creatives and gives them a platform to get their ideas off the ground. So please do check out the link in the description. You'll be supporting Spacedock, and I heartily encourage you all to check out World Anvil. Thank you for listening. This is Daniel from Spacedock, signing off. Thank you for watching Spacedock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the links on the screen right now or in the description below for our Patreon and channel membership services. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving our team and our equipment and allowing us to put together bigger and more exciting video projects for you guys on the channel.